Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh, and welcome to Talking with Teachers. Today we have another special guest, Ustaz Mobeen Vaid. Mobeen Vaid is a Muslim public intellectual and writer who holds an MA in Islamic Studies from the Hartford Seminary. His writings focus on how traditional Islamic frames of thinking intersect with the modern world. He has authored a number of pieces on Islamic sexual and gender norms, including Can Islam Accommodate Homosexual Acts, Quranic Revisionism, and the Case of Scott Kugel. Along with Muslim Matters, he has other articles which can be found on his Medium website, Occasional Reflections. I've known Mobeen for a number of years, and I've actually interviewed him before. We share what I wouldn't characterize as an alma mater, but we do sort of we did both study at an institute, Ma'had Ulum Islami wa Arabiya fi America, which was located in Fairfax, Virginia during the 1990s. And so this is not our first time speaking together on camera. Of course, updated versions of cameras this time. We have better quality this time. So we like to bring to the screen our brother Mobeen Vaid. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakumullah khair for having me.
Yeah, and of course, what I forgot to mention, you're a techie as well, right? So a lot of people don't know that. Yeah, so mashallah, really is an honor to have the opportunity once again to speak to you today, and thank you for agreeing for taking part in this very humble podcast, and I'm just hoping that it'll be a source of benefit for the viewers, and hopefully it will keep people busy and not involved with negative things. Inshallah. Yeah, right. So of course your most popular writing relates to the question of Islam and homosexuality, but before we get into that, I wanted to offer the audience an opportunity to get, I guess you'd say, some insight into your background. What was life coming up, where you from in the United States, among other things, where's your Islamic training come from, things like that, family background, whatever you like to share.
Yeah, sure. No problem. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalam ala rasulullah. In many ways, I would say that my background is unexceptional. So I grew up in Northern Virginia. So that's the DC metro area for people who are unfamiliar with it. I'd say my own upbringing in the area is probably less interesting than just the story of Northern Virginia in general, which is that Northern Virginia, especially in the 80s and early 90s, was what they called, I forget the exact term for it, they used something like bedroom communities. And the idea is that it was effectively a side room for the Washington government federal employees. So if you lived in the greater DC area, you were living there because you were a federal employee, or you had a job supporting the federal government. And so almost everybody lived in the area, either 1 or 2 layers removed from the federal government. And over time, what happened is that, especially in the 90s, there was a major economic boom. It continued into the 2000s. In the 90s, it occurred because Northern Virginia had favorable economic conditions, especially for businesses that wanted to relocate their headquarters there. It was less regulated. It was proximate to the federal government. Many of these companies had large lobbying outfits anyways. They also had suburban buildup. And so you had areas that were large, underdeveloped infrastructure that you could put in nice communities. And so you had this development boom of housing, mixed use communities. In the 2000s, after 9/11, that spiked even more, especially with the growth in defense contracting, intel, cybersecurity jobs. And so you had a number of people that moved there into Northern Virginia after that. And it's largely continued ever since. And so I'd say Northern Virginia, at least when I was growing up in Northern Virginia, it was a very rudimentary suburban community, not terribly populated, but also not sort of a small town. It's not like I was living in the middle of a farm, area, rural area in the middle of America. Nevertheless, now if you drive through Northern Virginia, it's just this sprawling metropolis with, data centers and tech companies and government contractors left and right. And all of that came about, I'd say, probably over the next 20 to 30 years. And so I grew up there. Northern Virginia also becomes consequential and significant because it was one of the earliest areas in America where Muslims migrated to in large numbers. So we have a number of large Muslim communities across North America. The Bay Area is a great example, right? You have huge Muslim communities in the Bay Area. Some of them are quite storied. But for the most part, I'd say the largest masjids in the Bay Area kind of came about in the last 20 to 30 years, right? In Northern Virginia, a lot of the Muslims that established themselves in America were coming in. You're going back into the 70s, right? The Islamic Center of DC was one of the first masjids established in America. That was a collaborative exercise that was put together by multiple countries as an organized political effort. But then beyond that, you just had a number of Muslims that came here as diplomats. So they had quasi-political roles, and they wanted to have masjids. And then you had others that relocated here on diplomat visas, but nevertheless were working in da'wah-oriented spaces. And some of those were supported and funded by foreign Muslim governments. Others just got jobs with them. But the idea is that you had a number of Muslims that in Northern Virginia relocated during that time. And so the Muslim community was pretty large. I think what people think of today with respect to Dallas, right, as this hub for Muslims, a very hospitable place for Muslims to live, a lot of scholars, a lot of large Muslim institutions. I'd say Northern Virginia was probably gearing up to be something like that in the 90s. Right?
Yeah,
it was
I
gearing
agree.
up to something like that. And then in DC, that entire area is gearing up. I mean, just if you look at a lot of scholars, plenty of them lived in there. And then 9/11 just really destabilized and shattered a lot of that. Seemingly overnight, you had a number of scholars that lived in the area that ended up leaving the country. Some for eminently justifiable reasons. The diplomat visas were revoked and people were called back who were working here. Institutions shut down. We obviously then had the global war on terror, and an extension of that was the domestic and sprawling surveillance apparatus that became implemented. A lot of Muslim organizations and institutions fell under intense scrutiny. And so what happened was even Muslims who were active in Northern Virginia ended up moving out of the area to other Muslim active metro areas that were growing, but didn't have the same environment and atmosphere that felt a bit more oppressive and intimidating. And so that exercise happened, especially with du'at, mashayikh, Muslim organizations and institutions. And so I'd say, my own experience was just kind of witnessing all of that and being part of it at different levels and in different stages of my life.
Yeah, and a lot of your writings seem to cover a lot of those issues. I mean, you've written about CVE, you've written about, of course, I mean, so many different things that relate to these issues of Muslims and voting, and I was listening to someone explain what happened in the most recent election, the gubernatorial elections there in Virginia. And someone was saying that one of the reasons that the Republicans didn't win was because there's so many government workers there in Virginia. And then Trump, he fired a lot of those people, so that's perhaps one of the reasons why the Republicans didn't win along those best. But it's sort of a side note. But
yeah, it's interesting. If you look at, depending on where you live, certain things are normal, but they're not normal to people outside of it. Like you've lived in Philadelphia. I don't know. Did you grow up in Philly? Like Philly, there's stuff that happens in Philly, which if you live in Philly are just really normal.
Yeah, right.
But you've just traveled to Philly. It's not normal in other parts of America or other Muslim communities at all. Right? It's not common at all in other Muslim communities. I remember when I lived in Philly for a little over a year. The masjid that was closest to me, that was Masjid bin Baz. Right? That's not a common masjid name.
Right.
In America, right? And in Philly, it's like whatever. It's a very common masjid name, right? And so that tells you all you need to know about the masjid, right? That's just the Philly scene. And then, I remember I was talking once to a Muslim brother who's living in Vegas, and he was telling me that it's not uncommon, especially for some of the masjids, to have Muslim employees who work at casinos. And this used to be the case where people would donate money on Fridays, and part of the donations they'd collect, it would be the chips, right? That would be part of the donation. They would have that there, right? It's not uncommon for us to get that on a Friday.
Right.
And so Northern Virginia, it's, some people who aren't familiar with the area, they find it very strange because you have all this proximity to power. and you have all this proximity to political power, political influence, and political activism. And so as a result of that, you have a ton of Muslims that work in industries like defense. You have a ton of Muslims who are working for the military-industrial complex. You have a lot of Muslims who are just a part of the machine in different levels, in different ways. You also have a lot of Muslims that aren't, but work in other sort of cognate government offices. People work for the IRS, HUD, or they're contracting to different projects. Idea is that it's not uncommon to run into people who are actually doing projects for the government at some level. So that, in fact, is not only ordinary, it's probably the default.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
And that's why when you talk about, even the government shutdown ending, Tim Kaine was one of the people who crossed the picket line and voted with the Republicans, and he's Virginia, right, congressional official. And so, you're probably feeling the brunt of that more in Virginia and Maryland if you're a politician than you would be otherwise, because so many of your constituents depend on federal work. So
yeah, right, mashallah. Yeah, I have somewhat of a strange question. Yeah, your ethnic background. I mean, a lot of people, I imagine people look at you, okay, well, hear your name, Vaid, what kind of name is that? Look at your face. Maybe he's Hispanic, maybe he's Arab, maybe he's something different, I mean, I don't know if I've ever asked you that question,
No. So I guess my relatives, my parents, they're all ethnically now from Pakistan.
Okay.
My mom's parents were from Hyderabad.
Okay.
Yeah, my mom's parents were rahimahullah. My grandfather, my mom's father, used to be the president of the Hyderabad Association of Northern Virginia, of DC. So he was the president of that when we were growing up.
So your last name, what does it mean?
I don't know what I'd have to look into. I've never had the curiosity to look into it.
Okay.
But I believe the background is it's all like Gujarati. So it's a Gujarati background name, and so it's not a totally uncommon name for people from that background. My dad's mother's last name was Bangi, so that last name as well is kind of all in the family. You have a couple of last names on my dad's side that are very common: Vaid, Bangi, Dada Boy. Like there are a couple of these last names that are all effectively relatives at one, 2, 3 levels removed. So
right, good. All right. So of course, like I mentioned before, of course, you work in tech, but what a lot of people are not familiar with is the fact that you are proficient in Arabic. You've studied Sharia and other aspects of Islam. When did that start? How old were you, and where did you study?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I guess it goes back to our favorite Mahat, right? So, well, in Northern Virginia, again, I grew up around the Adams Center, and there was a lot of da'wah activity, both in the Adams Center and throughout the area. And so I'd say in high school, I got activated a little bit more in my Islam. And so it's just like a very common American Muslim story where you start getting interested in Islam, and you say, okay, well, what's my first entry point? It's really, I start listening to audio cassettes and tapes, and start downing a lot of those. I try to find tape series. I try to listen and go to talks and lectures. I'll tell you the person who I used to binge listen to very much in high school, Hafidhullah, was Imam Siraj. And so remember, Imam Siraj used to, he'd have this. It would be this. I don't mean this disparaging. It was like a travel.
The Baptist ministers
he had this traveling thing that he did with him, and it was a couple of his brothers with him from Masjid Taqwa, and they would put this table, and it would just be full of cassettes, and there were 120 minutes or 60 minutes on each side, so you get 2 khutbahs per. And depending on the khutbah, sometimes it would just be one. Because that would be an hour khutbah that he just gave.
And there's like 5 different conclusions. In conclusion, and then
that's always what. He'd say in conclusion, then you go for another 20 minutes.
That's like what's pretty characteristic of him. Is like Imam Siraj was like he 3 or 4 different times, and in conclusion, Sheikh Hamza, his tendency back then was, okay, here's the title of the lecture. And he'll talk about every single thing other than the title until the very last 5 or 10 minutes, right? And so it was.
And so Siraj, they would sell these tapes. I still remember 2 for $5. So he'd come in town, and I just had shoe boxes full of his cassettes, and I would listen to them on the way to school. And I had Walkman or whatever, and I'd just be listening to his khutbahs all the time. And I just couldn't get enough of them. And then I started listening to others, and then you start attending Islamic events, conferences. And then we had different teachers in our area that I was very fortunate to study with and sit with, especially as a young person growing up, where they end up playing almost more than an explicit tarbiyah role, also like a mentorship role. You get to observe them and become friends with them and know them, and they had interesting and funny personalities. So Sheikh Kamal Makki was here. He's now in Houston. Sheikh Yusuf Idris, son of the late Sheikh Jafar Idris, rahimahullah. And then, other figures. Imam Majid was our local imam. And so just a lot of great people that we were able to benefit from.
Right.
And then, then you start growing in your faith and you say, okay, well, maybe there's a place I can sign up for Islamic studies. And the Mahad was there. The Mahad was really significant, both because it offered a high quality of education, but also for, a high school student, it was free. I mean, it was free. I remember the only thing I had to buy were the books, which at that time, it was like $60 or $70. And I remember thinking, man, $70, what a ripoff. Like,
right.
And these days, it's just nothing, right?
Yeah.
And you're getting, that was 5 days a week. 5 days a week, that was the intense program.
Right.
And that was 9 to 1, 5 days a week. I mean, just think about that you're just, it was really incredible with great teachers and great people, great students. And so it was an incredible opportunity. Then once the Mahad shut down, that just kind of continued, right? You just continue, you find teachers, you sign up for classes, took a lot of classes at Maghrib, started going to a lot. You just keep studying, and it's just like a lifelong journey. And then you have different mashayikh and people that you sit with, and and so it just continues and grows. So
yeah, mashallah. I mean, excuse me, I'm sorry. So you have siblings, and like, what was it like? Was there anything in your family's background which you would say, sort of lit the spark in your interest in academic pursuits, and especially in Islam?
That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, I do have siblings, but neither of them have sort of an academic bent at all. When it comes to growing up, I had a lot of friends that were interested in this. So in Northern Virginia, that's not uncommon, right, for people to have. And actually, a lot of the leaders of the Adams Center itself, when they started up, were people who were affiliated with IIIT, the International Institute of Islamic Thought. Many of them were PhDs themselves, and they were very invested in the development of Islamic academic works and social sciences for Muslims. And so, as you know, that was a big focus of their organization and institutions. And so the environment you're in is kind of surrounded by that. Even in the Mahad, many of the teachers were PhDs and advanced students of knowledge and scholars themselves, whose primary preoccupation was on the end of Islamic sciences that involved research and debating and discussing more advanced Islamic issues, and less so on the populist da'wah circuit type of activities. And that was evident in the type of output and discussions they were having. I joke about it, but I still remember one of my earliest khutbahs I gave, and this is in high school. We're doing high school khutbahs. I was a signed up khatib. I didn't know what I was doing. None of us knew what we were doing, And I remember I sat in a talk that Sheikh Yusuf Shubaili gave. And I think he's back in Riyadh. He left after that. He was in the Mahad. It was they had a translated talk, and he was talking about gharar in Islamic finance. That was his thing. And so the degrees of it, and I just gave it on that, because those were, back then you didn't have today someone's a khatib, they go on YouTube, they listen to khutbah, they can write it down and just recapitulate it and regurgitate what they heard. But back then it was actually really tough to find khutbahs. And you only had so many, and it's not as if I could just rip off whatever I heard very easily. It was difficult to find quality Islamic knowledge or reliable. And so I listened to this lesson, I tried to take notes on it, and I didn't know what I was talking about. I don't think the audience, I'm sure, did not come away with anything approximating an understanding of gharar, but I had some notes and from it. But this is you were just these. I only mentioned it because these were the types of dialogues and classes and lessons that actually were very common at that time. Which isn't to say that the ordinary sort of public class for the Muslim community wasn't available. It was, but you had many, many figures and classes that were engaged in that. And then even my mom's dad, my grandfather, lifetime, he himself was an academic. So he wrote for a couple of journals, the Washington Report for Middle East Affairs.
What was his name?
His name was Mir Ali.
Mir Ali. Okay. Vaid? Is it Vaid?
Mir Ali. Ali was the last name.
Okay.
So, he was a writer there. So he used to write a lot on subcontinent issues. That was his focus, especially India, Pakistan. Those were his key focus areas. The Washington Report for Middle East Affairs it continues to be a magazine, but it was one of the early magazines, I'd say, especially that was being published in DC, that was very critical of Zionism, took on a lot of issues that were Muslim focused, but it wasn't an explicit Muslim outfit. But the idea is it brought a lot of perspectives that were less common, and so he was one of the writers on the South Asian front.
MashaAllah. Yeah. The young people, of course, they don't know how far we've come, and how difficult things used to be. Right, and how unqualified so many of us have been, like in the past, right? So it's
well, and it's also I think I see this with a lot of young people now who want to activate themselves in Islamic work. There's a different path or trajectory for many of them, because there's a sense of, okay, I remember I met a brother once who was at that phase in his life, and he was building out his YouTube channel. And I told him, there's actually plenty of work to do locally where you could apply the level of knowledge that you're at in a more appropriate fashion.
Yes.
You can teach kids in an Islamic school. You can volunteer for Sunday school. You can do this. Like, you can do things that are actually completely commensurate with what you've studied. You don't have to go on YouTube. You don't have to try to be this big lecturer, because you're actually not there yet, right? And in some ways in the past, like, we were gated by the fact that those opportunities weren't available, which was to our benefit. And so
exactly.
There was a lot of hustle and blood, sweat, and tears. I still remember, you probably know him very well, mashallah, Harun Sellers.
Yeah, of course.
I remember youth group programs that he would give, and he would talk to us, and he'd give these really great talks. And the masjid youth group, and he was giving talks to 20 kids who were just hanging out at the masjid. And those are rough gigs, right? Comedians, sometimes you'll hear comedians talk about how they've like came up and how they had to hustle at like this bowling alley and pool hall, and no one's looking. I think sometimes du'at have that, where you're this talib ilm, and you're just showing up, and it's a no frills environment. It's not like there's any honorarium, there's nothing in it.
You used to call it paying dues. We used to call it paying dues. You pay your dues. Nowadays, people don't want to pay dues.
No one wants to pay their dues, right? There's a lot of how many people are going to show up, all that stuff. But at the end of the day, if there's anyone shows up, inshallah, maybe Allah accepts from it. And that was, I think there was a lot of that attitude, only because, frankly, that was common. It was very uncommon to get these 100, 200, 300 person type of gatherings. In fact, even the big scholars that were here at the time, many of them taught classes that were not well attended. I always say this about, Sheikh Taha Alwani, rahimahullah. A lot of people have differences with his views. I've written critiques of some of his books and published them in Aegis, actually, as part of the book reviews. I've written especially on the topic of Sunnah. But I remember I was probably in high school, middle school. It was this Adam Center in the Herndon branch. It was a Friday night, and there was Friday night lecture. And, he was the one giving it, and there was a chair set up. And I was just there on Friday night to hang out with my friends. I wasn't there for the talk. But my friends weren't there yet. And I was walking around the musalla, and he was sitting there. And I didn't realize that I had sat in a chair that was for the talk. And he started with me, just with me. And, 15 years old, 14, 15 years old. And he's just, and I was too nervous to leave. Like, I didn't want to just walk out in front of him. So I just sat, I didn't know what.
Right. Yeah.
And then I waited till a few people finally showed up, and then I quietly left. But I thought to myself, even now I look back at it, I say, SubhanAllah. He started that talk with just me in the audience.
Yeah, mashallah. Yeah. I've done that before. This lecture is only one person there, use the microphone and everything, right?
And at the time, he's he was a very big scholar and all of that. And the idea is that it didn't seem to me, being in the audience, that he was upset that and I wasn't even there intentionally. I didn't know. Like, if I had turned around before, I probably would have jetted before he started. Allah meant for me to be there for it.
Allah bless him and forgive him.
To your point, it's the pay the dues model. I mean, everyone goes through it, and I think that sometimes people get demoralized over that stuff, and inshallah they should view it as just part of the process, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts barakah and efforts through these types of things.
I mean, that's right. I wanted to shift a little bit to politics, cultural currents, things like that. Now we've seen our community grow and also digress in a lot of ways over the years. I think that it was, yeah, it was Bush. Bush was probably the first year or the first election that a significant number of Muslims they paid attention to, and as we know, like from back then, that Muslims were largely voting for President George Bush Jr. And then 9/11 happened, and of course there was a shift, because of all the blowback and the persecution that Muslims suffered, kind of pushed Muslims in the direction of the left. And then eventually we saw that even getting worse when Trump came into office, where Muslims were really, really terrified now. And it seemed that we went even a little further with our moral compromise, right? And of course, we know out of this is what we get articles like your own. Even my own article I wrote years ago, like the homosexual challenge to Muslim ethics, probably, very basic, I mean, yours is very sophisticated, much more sophisticated than mine. But I tried to put something out there that I didn't think existed at the time that people could build on. So you refuted this professor known as Scott Kugel, who in his book was attempting from what I recall, to justify homosexual acts through an Islamic legal framework. Unfortunately, of course, there are a lot of Muslims back then who were inclined to accept those type of ideas, right? And so, but alhamdulillah, I mean, your contribution was a breath of fresh air, as we say. And so, I mean, thinking back on those issues and where Muslims have come today, there eventually was the emergence of this document of the Navigating Differences, which was like maybe 3 years ago. I think it came out, where it was a bit of a 180 shift back in what I like to say the right direction of the community. It seemed that because a lot of our religious leaders who were apparently listening to political activists, about like the direction that Muslims should be going, and sort of the embrace of the left and their ideology acting as proxy for them. I mean, of course, I mean, there's much more I could go on and on. I mean, so, I mean, what, you have anything to say about this overall? I mean, what are your thoughts about where Muslims are today compared to where they were in the past?
Well, I think it's complicated by a lot. I mean, you're trying to capture a lot of historical political transformations, and then more recent ones. I think that what we're seeing from Muslims, and what I hope more and more Muslims are coming to realize, is that especially in a society like ours, ordinary Muslims are going to have some sort of political consciousness about what's going on around them, about the society that they're in, about the culture that they're surrounded with, and about the way in which politics inflects not only their community and their immediate interests and needs, also Muslims around the world. And so what we have had historically is, I think, a bit of a bifurcation between that reality and the way in which many Muslim leaders and institutions have functioned as, I would say, at best, just politically indifferent actors, where we're just going to be a platform that's open for interfaith. We'll have different candidates come to our masjid. We'll give them a mic to basically come here and advertise for their campaigns and try to solicit votes at most. At the end of it all, what ends up happening is that a political movement will get strong enough where some people feel motivated to suddenly get engaged. They get engaged very late in the game, often on reactionary terms, often because they feel that they're losing the grip of the community, and they'll just attach themselves to a regnant political bandwagon in ways that aren't as well thought out as they should be. Perhaps doing it for good intentions, but without reasoning that has been considered or thought through. And so I think that that's been a dynamic for a long time. And as much as Muslims may criticize and say, hey, these political activists don't have a deep commitment or conviction to Islam itself, the idea is, well, where are those people that have their commitments, that can try to guide the community, or at least offer political, social perspectives that extend outside of the masjid? It's one thing to say, well, Islam is the solution. It has solutions for problems in the world today. And if it does, the problems extend outside of the masjid, right? They extend into the world. They're supposed to inform how I live my day-to-day life. It tells me a lot about what's right and wrong and what it means to thrive both in this life and the next. And so if I want that flourishing for myself, I want it for those people around me. I have to be a moral actor. I think that's something that is impossible to shake. That's a durable part of our human existence. I might even say it's potentially fitri, right? This idea that human beings want to live for more than themselves. They want to be good people. They want to be upright people. They want to contribute to a good cause. And they see that people talk about standing on the right side of history. So given that human beings have this tendency and inclination, if we have no voice in a discourse that actually is trying to lobby people towards different platforms and viewpoints and worldviews that advise people on how they can do so in a material way, then we're actually selling our community short, and we're doing our community a major disservice. And what ends up happening is that when we are not part of the conversation, a lot of times it becomes, the divide grows, and it becomes a lot more contentious, wherein the quote unquote best and most secure theologically grounded Muslims are oftentimes those who just eschew politics altogether. And anybody that actually does care, get concerned, and activates themselves in public square in any capacity whatsoever just gets consumed by major partisan interests and ideologies in a way that is indiscriminate, in a way that does not discern or delineate between what's right and wrong, and that views them a lot of times along the way as potentially compromising or jeopardizing major Islamic commitments on that road and path. And so, I think Muslims have come to that recognition that we, whether right or wrong, we've got to figure out how to have a political consciousness on these issues. And that doesn't mean that we're all going to have a single solution to all these problems. It doesn't mean we're going to be politically unified on every issue. It does mean that as Muslims, we have to be a lot more deliberate with our own, with what we think of politics, right?
Yeah. What's troubled me more than anything else has been what seems like an organized effort to ensure that certain viewpoints are just not heard by the community. And I'm quite speaking, like, for instance, like about myself, for example, like, and I'm not an individual, for example, I'm not as politically conscious as it often may seem to certain people. In other words, what I mean by that is that I haven't really been committed to like voting and those type of things. I've only voted 3 times in my entire life. I mean, it's I believe like voting is like something that is effective when you do it as a block more so than anything else, not as an individual.
You're not lobbying on Capitol Hill and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I'm not doing those type of things, So I've written a couple of articles that you're familiar with. I know. And I've just tried to provide, a perspective, right? Which could be wrong in certain regards, and I just trying to force a conversation, right? But the reaction often is, oh, no. Those particular opinions are just, they're verboten, right? We can't actually platform those type of ideas or those type of people. We can't expose the community to these ideas. We want them to be on a particular page, right? And I've seen this not only, of course, the activists. I don't really expect much from them. What we call the activists, but the religious leaders. You would expect a bit more openness to those type of things, and it's been really worrisome, and it's not that I've become like despondent about the community. I still have hope that our community will kind of gain its balance eventually. I just hope it won't be too late, right? So,
well, I think so. Every discipline, every domain has a sort of fuzzy line scope and approximation of what constitutes acceptable variability. Right? What is the acceptable scope of difference that we're going to tolerate as part of the normative discourse that we're going to countenance within this discipline or this domain? And that gets sub-filtered and sub-defined based on subgroup or community. And you have to take all of that into account. But to give an example of that, if you are, I don't know, if you're a Republican or a Democrat, there has to be a scope that defines what you're willing to tolerate within your and within your umbrella. and there are things that are going to sit outside of it that you look at and say, well, that's if you're going to take those views, you're no longer a Democrat, you're no longer a Republican. What's interesting about Muslims is a lot of times, I think, especially religious Muslims, are very conscientious about those lines and limits when it comes to theology. And people who are less religious see those theological limits and lines as oppressive. So when you'll say, hey, these are, you can call yourself whatever you want, but these are actually definitional issues. Like what you're trying to propose is even with all of the ikhtilaf and all of the variation that we have in our legal tradition, we nevertheless do have limits on the types of positions that we regard as legitimate, or things that we can seriously countenance as part of a meaningful religious dialogue. And we do so because we have presuppositions, and we have a methodology, we have theorizations, we have usul and qawaid, and we have all of these cognate disciplines that help us understand how we can participate meaningfully, especially people who have knowledge can participate meaningfully in this conversation of how to address new issues that might emerge and how to sustain the tradition that we've inherited so that we reliably uphold it for the next generation and transmit it to them, right? I think oftentimes in politics, especially for Muslims, there's a question of, okay, what are those guardrails going to look like? And some people who look at guardrails within the theological tradition as being very oppressive, what they do is that they try to create a political guardrail that can seem very narrow, right? It's almost like you want tremendous wusa and openness to like the aqidah of Islam. You want almost none when it comes to the aqidah of your own
totally
politics and siyasa, right? And so there can be a bit of hypocrisy there insofar as you look at people and say, well, you know, how come in your concern, in your art, you don't actually have any serious availability and openness for different positions? Now, in saying that, I don't think anyone would suggest that any and every political position should go, right? Like there have to be guardrails where, at least as a community, we could say, that's a bridge too far. That is a bridge too far, right? Like
but what standard, what objective standard do we use for that, right?
Of course, and it's very easy to identify the flagrant transgressions, right? It's very easy to look at the Asr Nomanis or the Zudi Dassers and those types of figures and say, well, you know, that obviously that cannot be a politics that we will look at and say, well, that's just part of like the variation of Muslim political engagement, right? That can't be it. On the other hand, there are a lot of positions that we may personally disagree with quite vehemently, but we might nevertheless look at and say, okay, well, I am free to condemn, censure, and disagree with these positions, but I have to accept the fact that some Muslims are going to take those views, and I can't condemn them as Muslims, as Muslim political actors on the basis of their preference for that. And so I'll give an example that I think may be controversial to some people, may not to others. You know, I wrote a blog article criticizing Joe Biden, saying why Joe Biden had to go, especially during the early stages of the genocide. And personally, I was very partial to the idea that Muslims needed to vote against Kamala Harris. Like I just saw her as a continuation of the status quo. And I saw a lot of the same problems that I saw in Joe Biden, especially vis-a-vis foreign policy, but domestic policy too, right? But whatever, like if there were Muslims who said on sort of a good faith basis, an evaluation of what they saw as different political conditions and variables, that their preferred candidate was Kamala Harris, I wouldn't look at them as bad Muslims on that basis alone. Right?
Takfiri.
I mean, okay, like if you prefer whatever, right?
And there were some who did, some who did treat it like that.
Yeah, there were some who, you know, there are some people who really came at heart, like, how dare you, right? How could you, like, you're voting for Kamala Harris shows just your total indifference towards Muslim blood or something. And I get that perspective. I think, but I also think there are people who can appreciate that fully and still say, you know, maybe naively, well, she's going to be different than Joe Biden. Or that she's just better than Trump on this issue. Or or whatever. Like people are making judgments on the basis of deliberations that they're having to conduct. Where I come down probably strongest on these issues is that I just don't want people to ignore the types of considerations that come up, such that, you know, if the vote for Harris entails me saying I really don't care about bloodshed, death, and genocide in other parts of the world, if that's the precondition to voting, well, that's an issue that you need to reckon with. Like you've
Yeah,
got,
right.
like that's a real problem if that's the type of rationale that you're
Yeah,
exercising
right.
to get to the ballot and be in favor of her, or if the type of considerations that you take into account don't even begin with or deal with the question of, what's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala going to be pleased with, right? And I think as a
Yeah,
Muslim, that should be a fundamental question
yeah,
we ask,
right.
not only in politics, but throughout our lives. Like that's
Yeah,
when
no,
I
I totally agree. I mean,
when I
I
earn
think,
money, when I get a job,
yeah,
when I choose a job and where I'm working, I think at the end of the day, Muslims, like, this has to be front and center for us. Is I'm trying to do something that, sure, it's like I'm getting a job to provide for my family, I'm doing this, but I'm principally trying to do something that I make sure that I'm on the right side with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on, that on the day of judgment I can stand in front of him and say, look, I really tried very hard to live a
yeah,
life that was
right.
consistent with obtaining your pleasure. So
Yeah. I expect from a common Muslim, and what I mean by common Muslim is an individual who's not like in a position of leadership, especially religious leadership, to be a bit immature or less, I guess you're prudent, a bit more passionate about one single issue or two. I expect that, yeah. But when you have, just a culture of anti-intellectualism, right, among the so-called ulama class or the leadership class, I think that ultimately harms the community long term. It keeps it keeps the community in a bit of a siege mentality, sort of like victim. We constantly see ourselves as victim. We're vulnerable, and then we definitely are. We are vulnerable. That's kind of part of the point. But what I mean by that is that when you're anxious and when you're angry, you're more likely to make the wrong decision about things. You're more likely to be very myopic, when you consider the situation, right? And of course, everyone's attempting to predict the future, right, in a certain way, right? But you look at signs and tokens, and you say, well, I think that for this reason, that reason, you should be on this side as opposed to that side. And for me, my position has always been like this: whether you vote or you don't vote, I really don't. I mean, it's your choice. I mean, you don't have to vote at all, right? You don't have to vote for anybody, But
it's not fard.
right, yeah, right, exactly. So, and and I've just always just been trying to provide some ideas for people to consider, right? It's like yeah, I understand, this one issue, right? It's a very important issue, very, very important issue. But how many election cycles is that going to be the only thing that determines, who we vote for, right? And I've always, yeah.
Well, I think
Yeah.
one of the things that's encouraging is that an
Yeah.
increasing number of people, both Muslim and non, are coming to terms with the fact that, like, the establishment political parties are not, especially the status quo members and the core establishment figures, are really not very far apart. They have a couple of dog whistle issues that they bring up every year to drum up support and votes and pander to their partisan constituency and base. But sort of the distance between Lindsey Graham, Mitch McConnell, Nancy Pelosi, and Chuck Schumer is almost zero. Recognizing that on a lot of core issues, it's like the same person.
Yeah, exactly.
Basically the same person. And that a lot of the division that they trump up on the ground is very much performative. It's part of political theater. It's not based on like deep convictions or beliefs that these politicians have.
Well, the whole Mamdani issue just totally reveals that. It brings it to the fore, especially after the meeting with Trump just Friday. So
I mean, you think about how vicious and vitriolic it was.
Yeah.
I mean, we saw such brazen bigotry against him. Where, I mean, the week leading up to the election, they had something where you had more than one effort to connect him to the Twin Towers and 9/11. And saying if you want another 9/11, like vote Mamdani. Like it was that brazen and ridiculous. And it's like, okay, you can say a lot of things about Mamdani. Like if you really think this guy's an irhabi or something, you're insane. You are insane if like that's your perception of him.
Right. Yeah,
like
right.
That's your perception of him, of like all Muslims in the world.
Yeah,
That's
so ridiculous.
It's absurd.
Yeah.
And then and I think there's a brazenness of it, both on the attack side and the New York Post and all these people going after him for weeks and weeks and weeks, and all of the sort of crocodile tears from people like Sean Hannity after he wins. And then just a few weeks later, he's with Trump and they're chumming it up. And he's like, yeah, he's a great guy. And they're laughing. You have seen very few press conferences where Trump has been happier in recent memory with somebody in front of the microphone and on camera and with journalists. And he is in his element. And it's like, look, this is like, I think for people on the outside, there's a bit of like those moments can be very illuminating because, okay, this is politics. Politics, I don't see it that way initially. I think it's like Deen and Aqidah and I'm dealing with manahij and no, I'm dealing like this is politics. Like this is what's happening. And it's just being those moments become so revealing to people. And now more and more people are waking up and they're saying, yeah, like, in fact, you've heard this recently you've seen this, in recent years, right? Look, just consider over the past couple of weeks, not months or years, weeks, you've had Tucker Carlson hosting people like Cenk Uygur and Anna Kasparian, who are leftists, if there's ever been a leftist in the world. And they are finding themselves in radical agreement on so many different issues. They're saying, look, this is this game, like we just don't want to play it anymore. You see Candace Owens and the shifts that she's had. Nick Fuentes basically came out the other day and said, look, like we basically need to take our country back. We're losing our country. It's not right versus left. It is the American people against a very small, powerful elite that has been controlling this country and tells us that we don't have a voice or a choice. Right? And so, like, whatever you think about him and his influence, the idea is that more and more people are saying and singing that tune. And so the viability and sustainability of like hardcore partisanship, I think, has been declining. Partly because so many of those people that invested themselves in really hardcore partisan like platforms, like I think many of them are waking up. And I think some of them probably look back and are a bit embarrassed now. Like, man, I'd gone all in here, and now I realized that I cared. There's a movie, not to distract too much. I can't remember the name of it, but there's a movie about. I saw it on a flight one time, and it's a movie about a guy who's like this die-hard Red Sox fan, just die-hard Red Sox fan, and it's like he falls in love with this girl or something, and they get along so well, and he's ruining his relationship because he keeps prioritizing the Red Sox over this girl. He keeps prioritizing them. And there's one game that the Red Sox lose, and it's like this big game or something they lose. And he's walking on the streets of Boston, and he walks by a restaurant, and through the window, he sees some of the players from the Red Sox on the evening right after the loss, and they're laughing and joking and having a good time. And it occurs to him that he cares more about the Red Sox than they do.
I was about to say this. I was about to say that I think that the fundamental problem with so many Muslims, in particular people who I don't know, they could be first or second generation Muslims from the Muslim world, that it seems that too many Muslims actually believe more in the system than the people who run the system actually do, right? We actually swallowed this pill that democracy is real. This whole process, it works a whole lot better than anything that can happen in the Muslim world, right? So that and even though we don't talk that way anymore, like there was a time when Muslims talked a lot about like how the West is best in a lot of ways, but I still think that mentality still predominates among a lot of people, and so coming back to what I was going to say was just that one of the fundamental reasons why I actually haven't voted many times in my life has to do with the fact that when I was brought up in a culture of somewhat, I guess you would say, an anti-Western culture, right? That all my elders, they taught us that, no, we're not real Americans first and foremost, because I came up through the Nation of Islam. We're not real Americans. That was one. And then, we don't vote. We don't participate in the process. And then Muslims, the Orthodox community also had that same attitude about you can't validate, a government or a society that doesn't rule by Sharia, things like that, right? And then all of a sudden there was this flip at a certain point where Muslims started to say, no, now if you're not at the table, then you're on your menu, you have to vote, it's compulsory, so I've lived through all those changes, right? And so the very first president I ever voted for was Obama, right? During his first term, right? And so my attitude about government is that governments, the default of government is that they are misguided people. Right, the government's, aslu fi sultan ad-dalala. That's why I say this. That's my qaida. That aslu fi sultan ad-dalala. Right, and that's why we have a limited number of people who are called khulafa ar-rashidun. Right, and so for me, when I see good come out of government, I'm happy. Well, I'm the happier, I guess we'd say, right? Because I don't expect a lot of good to come out of government, and I think what happens, like even in the mainstream sort of white America, in particular the MAGA people, is that they're going through sort of these I guess you would say these somewhat growing pains at the same. It's almost like that they're coming to the realization of something that they should have come into a long time ago, and they're trying to change something which is perhaps too late to change. And so for instance, when I think about Trump, for example, like I've understood Trump for a very long time. That's why it's been easy for me to say, oh yeah, Trump good here better, than this person, because I understand that he's a BS artist, that that his whole sort of growing up, that he was a salesman, right? That he actually functions well in that environment because everyone else also is a BS artist, and he just happens to be very much more skilled at it than other people, right? So when I knew that, and I predicted even that once the elections were going to be over, that a lot of the anti-Muslim sentiment would subside, at least for a time, because I know that coming up, there's the midterms now, so you'll see an uptick once again, right? And you can see it a little bit, online, right? But I do think that you can't judge the general American public by what's happening in social media, right? Social media sort of magnifies things that are not magnified among the general public. And so in other words, I just think that a lot of people have unrealistic expectations. If you have more realistic expectations for the way the government will and can operate, then I don't think that people sort of get uptight or sort of made easily sort of turned off by it, because at a certain point is that I think most people, they don't really care what type of government they have. They really care that they have safety, they are able to own property, they have to live their lives and flourish and things like that. The average person, that's my belief. I don't believe they really care what type of government they have. I'm sorry to kind of went on for a long time, but I just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, I think part of I think there are different reasons why at least the media obviously dislikes Trump. He's an iconoclast. He's a bombast. He puts an ugly face on American empire. And he puts an ugly face on American politics. And so I remember in the first Trump term, he ran heavily first time around on immigration. That was probably his key sort of emblematic policy that he rode to victory.
Right.
And immediately afterwards, the big fight became one over immigration. And I think justifiably, a lot of people became outraged over some of the images that they were seeing of detention centers and cages and all of that. And what became really interesting was, at that time, to me at least, was the dialogue was, look at how inhumane we're treating these people. And then the Trump campaign's defense was, we didn't build these detention centers.
Right.
They've been here forever. These have been here forever. We didn't start deporting people. Obama deported more people than anyone before him. How come there's all this moralistic outrage now for something that's existed forever that you never cared about?
Yeah. Like, same thing with Epstein files too. Same thing now.
And so the honest defense at that time should have been, that's our fault. We should have cared about those things.
Yes, that's right.
We should have cared about them before. We didn't. It's to our detriment that we weren't engaged under prior presidencies, that we didn't try to restrict or rein in executive authority and executive power, that we didn't hold executive feet to the fire in the way that they were executing and instituting policies domestically and internationally in our name. And Barack Obama was as guilty of it as Donald Trump. But instead of doing that, they tried to offer a very strained defense of Obama to try to make it seem like the Democrats are good and Republicans are bad, which
Yeah,
is
right,
absurd, and no one was going to buy that. And so
right.
this is where I think a lot of people began to lose trust in the media, began to lose trust in political officials, because there's a sense of, okay, we are being taken for a ride here. We are being manipulated. We're not being treated honestly with what our politicians are doing. And even though he lies a lot, Donald Trump can, in that context, feel very refreshing, because at least once in a while, more than once in a while, he just speaks his mind.
Yeah, yeah.
Now I think to your point about MAGA, over the past, really, it's like not even been a year, man. It seems like
Yeah,
it's been forever.
right. Yeah,
Seems
yeah.
like it's
I
been
know. I know.
forever.
Right.
Dude. And the
Yeah.
guy's like, my
Yeah.
God, it's been 10 months or something, 11 months now. And with Trump, I think with MAGA, you have broad disaffection now, broad, because there's so many issues, so many major issues that he ran on, that not only has he not delivered on, but he's deeply disappointed. You know, you were going to clean up the swamp. You start palling around with Ted Cruz. You're best friends with Lindsey Graham. You're going after Thomas Massey. Your entire administration is filled with people like Marco Rubio. What happened? What happened? Kash Patel is vindictively going after people. Like, there's so many issues, one after another, that people look at and say, especially MAGA people.
Well, I think that those are like, I mean, the most of what you mentioned. I don't think that the MAGA people are put off by those. I think more so Democrats are put off by most of what you mentioned. I think that most of the MAGA people actually were, you know, I think most of the MAGA people are more put off by, of course, the Epstein stuff, the issue of the Israeli, the sort of catering to the Zionists, you know, and trying to outlaw sort of like,
The anti-Semitic speech and all that.
right, things like that. You know, it's more so those issues. I think that those are what I've noticed that most of the MAGA people were upset about. I don't, you know, I think that there are a lot of things that Trump is doing and has done that they have good reason to be happy with, but it's just not, at least those who are online, people who are online more so, you know, that they want to, like, say, drain the swamp. They literally want to do that, you know, and they think that this is really the most important thing. So that's why Epstein and all these other things is really a front and center for them. Yeah. But I'm sorry, I cut you off. Finish your point.
No, I was going to say, so when Trump ran for office, you probably remember this, when he first got in, there was a huge internal conflict and debate, especially amongst Trump's transition team, over who he was going to appoint to different seats, right? Who was going to be Secretary of State, who's going to be in this role, who's going to be that role. And before Trump had actually appointed anyone, which is this is very uncommon for a new president to do. It's very common for presidents to start announcing their appointees. They don't announce people that they're not going to appoint.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And he announced right off the bat, he said Mike Pompeo is not going to be part of this administration.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And then who's the other person? I think maybe Nikki Haley, something like that.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
He said they're not going to be part of my administration. And people, especially the Trumpers, they were very big on that. Right.
Yeah, right.
Because there was a sense of, we're not doing this whole neocon interventionism thing again. We're not going to start putting in the old guard into positions of power. And then when Rubio got in, like, the only one who celebrated it was Ben Shapiro. But a lot of the MAGA folks were outraged. I mean, a lot of them were really ticked off at that time online. And a lot of the MAGA forums, even on Truth Social, like, Trump got killed on that appointment. And so, and
yeah, but I think I don't think it's a big deal anymore. Yeah, but I think that probably just as it was a start. But like right.
Oh
now,
yeah, I'm just saying that was a very early thing.
Yeah.
Now, if you look, like, more recently, Trump did an interview with Lauren Ingraham, which was just a disaster interview. I mean, it was a disaster on Fox News. And in fact, at times I was listening to it, I was thinking, man, this guy sounds like Joe Biden. He really sounds like Joe Biden. It's incredible to listen to.
Yeah.
Because he was being asked about the economic conditions and economic uncertainty and the lack of affordability. And he said, well, there's no economic problems. The economy is great. It's as good as it's ever been. It's all affordable. And it's like, that's every single day. Like, this is, you know, people are voting on the basis of affordability. The life of the average person here has become far less affordable. You have more and more college graduates that are doing things like DoorDash to make ends meet. The average cost for a single family house continues to go up in most metro areas with at least $600,000.
Right. Yeah.
You know, his only answer to that is 50-year mortgage.
50-year mortgage, yeah, right.
Where you're imprisoned in usury for the rest of your life.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Probably collectively paying off millions of dollars to a bank. So you're just an indentured slave to a bank, a mortgage company. And so, you know, when you think about just the basic sense of dignity that people need to be able to live and afford their lives, and to be able to earn right? Not be given handouts, but just earn a living.
Mhm.
Like there are a lot of major failings on that. And I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
the
and
reason
that's why I think this is like
uh,
the probably the most important of all issues that most people are concerned with.
oh yeah,
You
no
know, the
question about
whole
it.
Epstein issue, whether it's Rubio. I
Well,
mean,
the
I think
Epstein issue
right,
is a
right,
self-inflicted wound as well because
right, yeah,
he ran on Epstein,
yeah.
and then I
Well,
think
he didn't run. He wasn't as emphatic about it as he was about the JFK files, because when he was asked about Epstein, you know, he was like, you know, yeah, I'll release him. You know, and they said
the
JFK, he
problem is
said,
his
yeah,
bigger
he
ecosystem.
wasn't, you know, but it was actually more Cash Patel and those
Cash
guys.
Patel,
Yeah,
Bongino, even
yeah, right,
Vance,
yeah,
right? All of these
exactly, yeah,
folks were big
hmm
into it, and so his entire orbit
yeah,
of
mhm,
appointees was
yeah,
really big on releasing it. And I think, like,
mhm,
transparently, he didn't expect his name to show up so much in
yeah,
it, right? Like
right,
that's obvious.
right.
Like he didn't know how
Well,
often he was mentioned.
well, I don't
And
think it's
once
so
that
much.
became obvious, it's like, all right,
No,
I don't
no,
want it to come
I
out.
don't think it's so much that. I think what it is, he's protecting people, right? You know, he's protecting donors, he's protecting a lot of those up here because think about it like this, you know, if you think that if the Democrats were aware of something that they had on Trump during Biden's administration, you think they wouldn't have let it out? Wouldn't have released it by this point.
Well,
I
yeah, I
mean,
do.
you know, I
Well,
mean,
it depends. I mean,
they tried to bankrupt the guy. They
yeah,
tried to put him in prison. You
yeah.
know, as a
Well,
matter of fact, you know, I mean, you know, maybe even it was them who tried to even kill the guy, right? So I
well,
mean,
that
you know,
so I
why would what other reason might he have to withhold the files? You know, and I believe is because I mean he's protecting people, and perhaps he's even utilizing that information to himself blackmail people himself, right? So.
well, I think that presupposes that the Epstein
mm,
files only incriminate Trump. And so if Trump was the only sort of stake or the only person at stake in the Epstein files, then yeah, like then they wouldn't have. Then the idea is that they could have opportunistically done it, presumably assuming it does. But the idea is that there are plenty of people who got incriminated in those files, not just
Yeah,
Trump.
yeah,
So
right,
it's
yeah,
left and
sure.
right. And
Yeah,
so
but I'm saying
major.
up to this point and everything, you know, the only incriminating information we've seen has been
Oh yeah.
about people who are not Trump, right? You
Oh
know,
yeah.
so
Well,
like, yeah, why? I mean, why do we have to reach so hard, so far, you know, into that? You know, I mean, I again, you know, I don't know. Maybe there is something there, but I do know that there's been multiple occasions where he's been vindicated. You know, when it comes to the issue of the Epstein files, at least up to this point. You know, I don't think that is. I don't think there's good reason to believe that. Oh, the reason why he was holding it because his name appears so many times. Yes, why wouldn't it? You know, he was friends with the guy for like for about a decade, right? He
yeah. I
was, you
mean,
know,
look, I
right?
think
Yeah,
like what was
he
it like?
testified against him, even testified against him as well. That's another thing too, right?
Sure, yeah.
So yeah,
Although they clearly did have.
Trump. He actually blamed Trump for himself going to prison, right? So
Yeah.
right,
Although
yeah,
they had a
so
friendship. I mean,
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah,
FOIA request release
yeah,
on the
yeah,
last
yeah,
files, at
yeah,
least the ones
mm, mm,
that were released,
yeah,
they censored and redacted his name throughout it. And that was just a few months ago. So
mm,
those were a subset of the files. So
mm,
again, I think
mm,
obviously it implicates a lot of actors.
mhm,
There's
yeah,
clearly a
yeah,
relationship between Epstein
mhm,
and
mhm,
Mossad. And
mhm,
so you have the Israeli government that gets incriminated at very heavy levels. You have people like
mhm,
Alan Dershowitz. You have
yeah,
powerful actors on
right,
the left and the
mhm,
right. You have
mhm,
celebrities. You have heads of state.
mhm,
And so there are a lot of people that stand to be taken down by a complete release of it, or at least
yeah,
stand to be somewhat scandalized.
right, yeah, yeah,
I
mhm,
guess partial coverage for those
mhm,
individuals could be because there's so many names.
mhm,
It's like it's
yeah.
difficult for one to stand out more than the others.
Yeah, and I
Uh,
think that's another thing, another possibility as well, which is
yeah,
that
yeah,
the release of the files themselves without being redacted could actually expose a potential secret that's been kept for multiple decades, which may be that
yeah.
Israel just nothing more than the fall guy for all of the savagery that they themselves have been sort of imposing upon other people, right? Where rather it actually was the United States directing them to do these things, and their tactics, the way they go about those things may be exposed, and that itself may actually affect the level of trust between other countries and allies and things like that. So I mean that's a possibility too. At least I've entertained that. I could be wrong about that, but I do think that
Uh,
there are multiple reasons why you might not want to allow for the files to come out, right? But I mean, but of course, I think the larger issue I think here that I wanted to sort of come back to is that that fundamentally our community has seemed to overlooked the fact that too many actors in our own current government don't really believe in the principles of the country, of what we call Western civilization, the values themselves, and we often seem to believe in them more than they do, or at least we want to exploit those values for our own purposes. Naturally, a lot of us may do that, and I think if you actually have a bit more of a I consider myself, cynical, right? And when it comes to these type of issues, and that's why, like, I can sort of deal with these things like this, because I don't feel like I'm losing or winning if Trump loses or the Democrats. I sometimes I'm afraid of like Democrat policies. I'm definitely afraid of them, right? But I also feel that, okay, well, it's a big game. It's a lot of acting, right? That goes on, and I felt pretty confident that once Trump met with Mamdani, that it was going to be much more of a I guess you'd say a coming together of minds, and understanding what occurred, because even Mamdani, nothing he can't really do any of those things that he promised without the governor's authorization, right? And then the governor, also is concerned about, like, federal funding from Trump, right? So if Mamdani wants to follow through on some of his promises, he has to make up with Trump on some level. And I'm quite sure that Kathy Hochul told him that. They were, no, you have to do something. You can't promise people all these things and then expect not to actually compromise, with the people who actually have, a greater authority over actually whether or not those things are going to occur. So, yeah, I just think that things are a bit more complicated and complex than we often imagine, right?
Yeah, so there's actually a good conversation on this, and I don't know if you ever follow Breaking Points. It's an interesting podcast.
Yes,
I remember Sagar and Krista, they had a good discussion on sort of the prospect of whether or not Mamdani can achieve any of his proposed outcomes. I think Sagar was a bit more cynical about it, simply because he said there's just, New York politics is corrupt, and it involves a lot of different tentacles and actors and bureaucracies and groups, and his ability to work through that seems to be very difficult, and so he didn't see a prospect. I think Crystal was a bit more bullish.
And I think that's why a lot of MAGA people actually voted for Mamdani. Because I think they know he really can't do those things. They say, okay, no, he's he's better than Cuomo and these other guys, right?
Yeah, so I think I think there's an extent to which a lot of Mamdani's proposals have been blown out of proportion by his antagonists. Like, a lot of people misframe the things that he's actually proposing. Whether it's like the grocery store proposal for city-owned grocery. I mean, it's like a pilot program with 5 stores. I mean, that's a pretty modest proposal in a city of what, like tens of millions of people. I mean, at least 7 million people in New York City.
I think about 8 million.
Yeah, 8 million people in New York City. I mean, to get like 5 doesn't have to be big sort of stores that have subsidized pricing that the city is helping provide for. That doesn't seem crazy. Like, it's far less radical than I think what some people would suggest. And, I mean, like, in terms of economic factors and the extent to which the government's being involved, like, the government has, like, this is part of the challenge with, I think, even MAGA discourse that a lot of people are waking up to. Is like, okay, the government, whatever one thinks about like socialism, the government's already operating socialistically.
Yes.
They've invested and taken a huge share in what's it called? Intel. They're taking entire shares of major corporations. They're taking more and more tax money. The budget never goes down. They're spending so much on our behalf.
We have Social Security.
Like they're huge programs, and most of these programs don't actually come to our benefit, right? Especially the wars and foreign intervention stuff and the sprawling military apparatus. That's usually not done in our name at all. Or if it's done on our name, it's done with a very thin pretense. And so someone showing up and saying, hey, like, I actually have some programs that I want to institute that can help you. Obviously, that's going to be an attractive message. And that's why I think even if you follow like people like Tucker, Candace, and others, even though they've been critical of Mamdani as like a socialist Democrat, they've actually probably been a lot more sympathetic towards him in talking about him and the reasons why he's popular than you would hear from definitely someone like Ben Shapiro or even Democrats. Like, it's weird because you'll find that I think you'll find Nick Fuentes, Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, like all these people, probably show more verbal support from Mamdani
Yes.
in some of what he speaks about and the approach
Mhm.
that he takes
Mhm.
than you'll get from Hakeem Jeffries,
Yes.
Richie
Right.
Torres,
Yeah.
Chuck
Chuck
Schumer.
Schumer. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like that's a real indictment of the Democratic Party, how much they hate this guy too, right?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But it also exposes the fact that I think more and more people on the ground are saying,
Mhm.
hey, like this is a moment where if MAGA is going to be something, it can't be like MIGA or whatever. It can't be like
Mhm.
make Israel great again. Like
Right.
that's
Right.
not what we care about.
Mhm.
And our brand, right? Like sort of
Mhm.
what the precondition for our political engagement can't be
Mhm.
ignoring genocide. It can't be
Mhm.
ignoring just
Right.
wide
Exactly.
scale blood
Mhm.
and death and destruction. And if we want to improve the conditions of the people on the ground here, we
Mhm.
have to think really conscientiously about the maintenance of American empire
Mhm.
as
Mhm.
well as where our tax dollars are going, right? Like,
Right. Right.
actually, this is an area where, I remember this over the past 2 years. I've just thought to myself, okay, if there's any opportunity for me to like reduce my tax footprint, I'm going to do it. Like,
Mhm.
I don't want to keep
Yeah. Yeah.
paying
Mhm.
into global war. I mean,
Mhm.
it's not. I know that sometimes people frame taxation as this philanthropic enterprise that's just helping the poor, and it's like,
Mhm.
no, I can give in charity.
Yeah.
That's what I'm
Yeah.
concerned with. But the government, whenever they raise taxes, they raise it on that
Mhm.
pretense, and then they apply more and more money towards killing and destruction throughout the world.
Yeah, yeah.
And so
Well,
that's
I tell
where
students
the
quite
budget.
often. Yeah,
Yeah,
I tell students often that the government doesn't have a right to your property,
yeah,
right? And so
yeah.
we pay taxes because we don't want trouble with the government. That's it. It's not because they have some sort of inherent right to what you actually own, right? So, but a lot of people do believe that.
Yeah,
So
I mean, look, the
yeah.
debt never goes down, right? It's not
Hmm.
like it's not like the debt's being paid back. It's
Hmm.
not as if the cost
Yeah.
of living decreases. It's not like
Hmm.
inflation is subsiding. So, like these are the types of issues that I think ordinary Americans can coalesce around and
Hmm.
to
Right.
consider around. And you're seeing even like politically in the halls of Capitol Hill,
Hmm.
you're seeing interesting alliances that get produced by people like Ro Khanna.
Hmm.
And they're not all perfect figures, but the idea
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
him and Thomas Massey and Marjorie
Hmm.
Taylor Greene and
Right. Yeah.
recently announced a resignation, but you're starting to see
Hmm.
movement that would have never been imaginable,
Hmm.
4 years ago,
Hmm.
let alone, 20 years ago. You just never saw this type of stuff. And now you're seeing it in real time on
Hmm.
really consequential and important issues. And I think if you're a Republican or a Democrat, part of the establishment, you're shaking in your boots because
Hmm.
you recognize that this has the possibility of upending the political order in really dramatic ways.
Yeah, no, it's a really fascinating time to be alive. I mean, to
Yeah.
see everything that's happened over the past few years,
Yeah.
and that the tables have been turned on the Zionists, and they're really trying hard uh, to distract from their own excesses through trying to get by trying to get people focused on Muslims and Islam and Sharia takeover and and I guess to an attempt to try to create some sympathy for themselves or even doing things that actually will increase anti-Semitism to the extent that real anti-Semitism actually begins to manifest itself materially, and that itself leads to a sort of a mass reaction where people actually start to feel sorry for them. I think that actually may be the ultimate goal of a lot of these sort of the information and opinions and statements being expressed by certain people that is partially out of desperation to try to save what they have. But I think for some of those people, it's an attempt to actually increase hatred of Jews, so that if there is right some attacks on Jews, that it will be utilized as a way to say, hey, we're being attacked again. There's attempt to people actually want a new Holocaust and things like that. So Nick Fuentes, for
Zionists,
example,
yeah.
yeah,
Well, if
yeah,
Zionists want people to hate Jews, they're probably doing a good job, right? I
yeah,
mean,
right, yeah,
most of these people are so bigoted and so
mm-hmm,
hateful on the type of
mm-hmm,
things that they say.
mm-hmm,
And what's been stunning to witness is just the fall from public grace of a lot of these big public Zionist
mm-hmm,
actors. I mean, you look at someone like Ben Shapiro. Ben Shapiro has what, 7 million followers or something like that on X.
That he bought.
Yeah, I know.
A lot
like
of those
now,
he bought them actually paid money for them.
of course, like he's a total
Evidence
AstroTurf
of them that way.
operation, right? And but at a time, one could say that Ben Shapiro was a bit of a public figure, and people followed him, and he had. There was like a novelty element to Ben Shapiro as a figure who's this young, up and coming conservative voice, and he was looked at as a public intellectual and going on campuses and debating and this and that. And then now, after a few years, he just comes off looking so lame, so uninteresting. He's a complete chill. His political sensibilities are completely detached from reality. He persistently says things that no one finds even remotely politically insightful, let alone viable or practical. He is hated by just about everybody. If you look at his actual viewership when it comes to his videos and YouTube, it's completely plummeted. It is completely plummeted. His entire platform is just being kept up and propped up by Zionist funding, and that's it. I mean, it's artificially propped up. And so,
he was good. He was good for the culture war and culture war in the beginning, right? I think he said a few things that were very unique. No one else was saying at the time. I actually used to share some of his videos a long time ago, right?
I think the joke now is,
I
think the joke that people say is when he's not arguing with like blue-haired girls on college campuses, he really doesn't have a whole lot to say that people agree with or find sympathy with. And so that's the thing. And you look at a lot of these figures that were supposed to be on sort of the bleeding edge of like new age conservatism, they've completely lost credibility. And even the old age conservatism, people like Mark Levin and others, they're just maniacs. They're just total maniacs. And then you look at, to your point, the desperation that they have to employ. Recently the no longer translating of Hebrew posts on X, as if now it's like
crazy,
crazy.
It's so crazy.
It's insane. It's insane, and it's funny. It's almost comical because they say enough stuff in English.
I know.
Right? They say enough stuff in English already that we actually don't need the Hebrew anymore because they've taken the mask off so badly. And even if they say it elsewhere now, there are enough people who speak Hebrew that can translate it, and they'll just put it as a subtitle in the video, and suddenly like the entire X limitation becomes circumvented. Like the genie's out of the bottle, the cat's out of the bag. There's no putting it back in. And I think the more and more people just get exposed to this, the more they realize that it's just like a maniac state. And when that's the case, like, frankly, that's like a real problem for them. Like, they've got to figure out how to rein in their own excess. They have to rein in their violent tendencies. That's not our problem. Our problem is to, I guess, continue drawing attention to it, which not only us, I think plenty of people are now doing. And they're doing it on a regular basis. I mean, you think about the range of extremely popular podcasts. And some of the figures we've been mentioning on the conservative side have been really vocal on this, but even like Theo Vaughn and others, major actors, major right and left personnel who are coming out on these types of issues and getting more media attention, and their platforms continue to grow. You think of some of these people, I mean, people can think what they want about them. Ian Carroll. Ian Carroll is. Ian Carroll came out of nowhere a few years ago. Ian Carroll probably has 1 million some followers. Ian Carroll's primary preoccupation for the past 2 years has been exposing and highlighting Zionism. It's been Zionism, Zionist funding, Zionist corporate lobbying, and it's been focused on Israel. And that's like, that has built him a very, very large following. And then you have other actors that are influential with the right that have really taken on this cause in a very strong and principled way. And Glenn Greenwald's one of them, but there are plenty of others as well. And so you take all of that into account, you take a step back and say, look, the winds are shifting, even if, like, look, the establishment Democrats, the establishment Republicans haven't moved a single inch on this, right? But they recognize just as much as anybody else that that's not a tenable position because their bases have shifted so far. We're talking about 30, 40 point shift amongst Republicans.
I think 35 and under, 35 and under is like Israel's name is totally, it's mud, right? It's totally
they've been showing the videos now of like different like conservative conferences. I think like AmCon happened recently, before that a Turning Point USA program, and you have people like JD Vance and others at these things, and the questions from the audience, which are just just ordinary middle American sort of white conservative Republicans who are part of the MAGA scene, and their questions are all about Israel and Zionism, and And it's almost like, oh my God, like it's palpable now. It is palpable.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is not an avoidable issue for these guys with their own base.
Yeah.
And the type of figures that are emerging as sort of thought leaders, especially with young people, have taken on this issue in a very muscular way. And so you're losing control of your party. And that, like, people like Mark Levin get it. People like Ben Shapiro get it. That's why they're in crisis mode, right? But I don't think that there's any way that they can fully reel this back in.
Yeah, no, I don't think so as well either. I think that I think that perhaps the greatest danger to what's happening right now for us is that one of the reasons that many of these people are reacting this way is because, they're Christians and they come to realize, what the Talmud says about Jesus. They've come to understand a little bit more about Orthodox Judaism and their beliefs about people. They don't see the Judeo-Christian alliance as a true alliance. They see America as a country that was established for white people, white Christians in particular. And so the danger is that they go to that extreme and then undermine the Constitution and things like that. So as Muslims, I feel like that we have to figure out a way, at least if we can find people who are reasonable, among those groups. Like, for instance, the man who actually organized the march in Dearborn, who then, after visiting the masajid, I forget his name, then he actually changed up. He apologized to Muslims, said, no, actually, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have started this. But people like them is like, no, that we're not here to destroy your Constitution, right?
Well, and I think I think for American Muslims, this is an opportunity for them to reorient their politics to be more focused on a type of different sort of coalition building effort. We're not talking about permanent alliances. We're not talking about ideology. We're talking about prudential political decisions that can be made at different points in time that can help engage people that wouldn't ordinarily engage with us. So I remember, this was very early after October 7th. I went to a protest in DC. I live close to DC, so I go to protests a lot. And I figured it's the least I can do. I went to it for Gaza, and this is the genocide that kicked off. It's SubhanAllah, they were just getting plummeted. And, rahimahullah, Allah Azza wa Jalla, make things easier for them. And I was in DC at this protest, and there was a sister on stage. And she was, you're a protest, you're yelling on stage, this and that, And she said, when we say free Palestine, or freedom, when we say
from the river to the sea.
Well, when she said, when we promote Palestinian freedom and we talk about freedom for Palestine, we are saying that we want, when we want justice and freedom for Palestine, we want economic justice. We want Palestinian freedom. We want environmental justice and climate justice. When we talk about freedom for Palestine, we want gender justice and gender freedom. And I just thought to myself, no. Like, actually, that's not what I'm saying. Like, I'm not, why are you, like, subhanAllah, I just thought to myself, this is insane at this moment. Wallahi, I was sitting there thinking, at this moment, as Palestine is being bombed mercilessly, you're trying to tether people's concern for this. Tons of people have shown up to this from all political walks of life. And you're putting them in a position to say, if you care about Palestine, you care about my very niche left-wing political project, and you're going to be part of it all.
Yes, right. Yeah.
Because that's when I say it, I mean all these other things. I was like, no, when I say it, I don't mean all of that. I don't mean all of that.
Right.
When I say freedom for Palestine, I mean freedom for Palestine. I don't mean gender freedom, justice. I don't mean all of these other issues. Why are you trying to force me into your pet political project at this moment? And this, I think she was Palestinian. She's yelling up there. I just thought, subhanAllah, who told her that this was an advisable talk track?
Yeah, right.
Why would this organization that is focused on Palestine, why would all these people that came out for the genocide make their political advocacy so partisan and ideologically alienating for anybody who showed up here that's not a far left actor? Because I remember it was DC, it was a nice weather day, a lot of people had come out, many people from, and I'm thinking, there are probably people who are here who are conservatives and have just seen images of dead children and have just seen the destruction in Gaza and are saying, I'm here because even I care about this. And yet your advocacy platform is just it's 10 years old. It's a 10-year-old message.
Right.
For, okay, like maybe that was a different talk track you employed, after George Floyd and BLM or something, but now we're talking about real human lives in a real political moment.
Exactly.
You have to change. And I think that takes a type of maturity that some of these organizations are going to have to grow into, because some of our Muslim organizations were staffed out in those times. They built out their staff, they constituted their organization around a lot of those political priorities. And I think over the past 2 years, many of them have had to change a lot. Right? Many of them have had to change a lot. Now, I don't know that all of them have shifted. And this is an opportunity, frankly. It often feels like, we probably need new voices. We need new institutions in the Muslim community. A lot of, mashallah, we have a lot of institutions that have done a lot, but institutions go stale, right?
Yeah, right.
Institutions go stale. There are new problems that emerge. There are new issues that we have to address. And those issues can't always be addressed using the same old playbook that we had, 15, 20 years ago. We need to start thinking differently. And there are potentially better ways of doing this. And if that increases the variation of what we have, great. And if that wins out because it's more politically informed or just better, then great. Like, I don't think we need to be insecure about that. But we just need to be aware, obviously, like, people have their own interests. People have their own agendas. Like, not everything's going to be perfect, but at the end of the day, like, on us is, I think, for individual Muslims, that we continue working for causes that are, inshallah, pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We maintain our commitments and convictions. We do what we can in this dunya with an eye towards the akhirah that Allah accepts from us.
Ameen.
And we try our best to be informed actors, such that we don't just blindly attach ourselves to whatever people are saying,
right,
in a given moment in time, but instead are, we're trying to do our best. We're doing some sort of ijtihad as an individual, and that may mean that we all don't agree on every issue, which is okay. But hopefully on the big important issues, inshallah, we can find a lot of solidarity. And as Muslims in a community, we can develop an ummah consciousness that can move forward.
Inshallah. Mobeen, I really enjoy listening to you speak and speaking to you at the same time. But we've been here. I've helped you for a long time, but how can someone follow your work?
Yeah, that's a good question. I haven't really, and I say it's a good question only because I haven't been doing a lot of work over the past year or so. So I do write on my blog called Occasional Reflections. It's very occasional these days, only because I've been trying to, it's become more difficult for me to muster up the energy for it. But I'd say follow me there, inshallah. I am still writing once in a while, so I do regularly. When I do publish, inshallah, it'll be updated there. And so I'd say if they want to follow me, that's the easiest place to follow me. I'm not as active on social media as I once was. Platforms like Facebook and things like that, you're probably not going to see as much out of me. But I'd say the Occasional Reflections, that blog's probably the best place for people to follow writings that I put out, inshallah.
Yeah, well, alhamdulillah. And also you all can find a number of his articles on Muslim matters.
Yep.
He's written multiple articles related to, of course, the issues of gender, transgenderism, homosexuality, social justice, CVE. Even has a review of the study Quran. So Mobeen is a prolific writer, writes very well, and you can see he can speak very well as well. He's a teacher, right, in his own way. And that's why we had him here. And I do hope that more people pay attention to his writings and his scholarship. Please do also have a look at his Medium page. Really do thank you for taking the time out for this discussion.
No, jazakumullah khair, Sheikh. I'm very honored to be here, and I appreciate the time.
Alhamdulillah wa barakallah feek. Until next time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Subscribe to Lamppost Education Initiative on YouTube and Spotify.